Hey, Comics Cubers. Today we have Sophie Campbell, the upcoming writer and artist on Supergirl, where Supergirl returns to Midvale. Before we get to our interview, I would like to remind everyone that you can subscribe to our Patreon. We have three tiers: a tip jar for $1. You get to be a Comics Cuber for $3, where you get to see my rants and my thoughts on various things like comic book movies, cartoons, animation, comics, of course, including what I'm reading this year. I'm targeting to read 60 comics this year, and it looks like I'm going to go over that. And the $5 tier, which is where you get to be a producer, where you get to be credited at the end of each video. So without further ado, here's Sophie Campbell. Sophie, I have one question that I ask everyone who comes onto the show for the first time, which is a very simple, why do you love comics?
Um, God, why do I love comics? I feel like I don't know. I feel like it's kind of like an elemental thing. Like I don't know. It's almost like asking like why does somebody love like movies? It's like I don't know. There's just something about it. I feel like I'm like relatively good at making them. That's like maybe arguable. So that's definitely part of it where like I just feel like some kind of like connection to the art form in a way that I can't like really articulate unless we get into like like the pacing and like how the story is told on like a technical level. I guess that's part of it too. um
I think that's an interesting point because I feel like of all of the people I know who are into comics, whether or not they have made them, comics has the higher rate of people who are into them wanting to make them as opposed to like books. Not everybody who reads novels wants to write a novel. Not everybody who
right.
watches movies wants to make. Well, do you think there's something to that?
I do, yeah. I feel like I don't know. It's like you maybe like look at a comic, especially like when I was a kid or whatever, reading like Ninja Turtles and like Calvin and Hobbes and stuff. Like there's something about it that has kind of like an element of just like, oh, I could do this, or like I want to do this because not because it like seems easy or like anybody could do it or whatever, but there's definitely something like kind of intimate about reading a comic like on paper, it's kind of like a solo activity, you
Yeah.
know, and there's something about like the kind of intimacy of like seeing what the artist has like put down on paper.
I feel like there's something to those two that you mentioned as well because they look like anybody could do it, but then you start trying to make those. Like Calvin
Right.
and Hobbes specifically looks easy, and then you start trying to draw Calvin, and it's not as easy as you think. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, you realize like that Bill Watterson is like a genius, and you're like, oh, okay. But then, you kind of like have a taste for it or whatever, and you're like, oh, well, like, I'm gonna get better, and I'm gonna do something like as good as Calvin Hobbes, which is like impossible, but there's still that like drive that kind of like, gets like, implanted into you.
Are those the two that you think kickstarted your love of comics?
Yeah, without a doubt. Those are like the two big ones for me. Like, Calvin Hobbes, like, you know, there's like an accessibility to it. I think like obviously it was in the newspaper, so like and everybody at that time in the states was seeing that comic. It was huge,
Yeah.
and just like the collected books would come out and stuff, and I would just like pour over those big Calvin and Hobbes books. Um, and like I would try to draw like Bill Watterson when I was a kid and stuff, obviously. um and then the old Ninja Turtles comics, like the old Eastman and Laird stuff. Like I had these like colorized books by First Publishing, I think it was, and they're I still have them. They're just these dog-eared messes,
Yeah.
and there's something like so raw about like those old comics, and that's what like really connected with me, I think.
Yeah, I was born in 82 and I also lived in the Philippines, right? So by the time I was getting Ninja Turtles comics, it was the Archie adaptations of the Saturday morning show.
Right, right.
So I'd like to ask, what was the Eastman and Laird stuff like getting it off the stands? Because that's something I've always been fascinated by.
Yeah, like I was like a little bit late to that, because like it's like 19 like 1989, like when I
Hmm.
kind of like started to read that stuff. So like they had been doing it for a few years at that point, but like you could still get back issues and stuff. Um, but yeah, it was definitely like, I don't know, thrilling, I think, at that point, like because like the cartoon, like kind of like Turtle Mania was like just getting going around that point.
Yeah.
And like the toys and stuff like that, the toys were also like really big for me. Not so much the cartoon, but I remember,
Interesting.
yeah, like I was kind of like backwards. Like I actually got into turtles not specifically because of the comics, because a friend of mine had the Palladium Games Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Other Strangeness tabletop RPG book from 1985, and it's all Kevin and Peter art. That was like the first licensed thing they ever did, and a friend of mine had that, and I was like, whoa, like what are these turtles? Like they have all red masks, and like they look like really intense, and just like the artwork in that book was like the coolest thing I had ever seen. And so I was just like, the cartoon turtles, they just look like babies compared to these other
Yeah.
turtles. And I went out and looked for like the Kevin and Peter comics, and like that was it.
It's like watching Super Friends Batman and then suddenly picking up a Neil Adams Batman.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Where it's just like that other stuff is it's just for babies. Like I don't want to be a baby, kind of like mentality, like, which is stupid, but that was like the mentality like when I
No, I
was
mean,
little.
if you're a kid, that's exactly what you're thinking. Now you're an adult, you're like, oh yeah, Super Friends is awesome.
Right, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, the turtles that I like, they like stab people and stuff and like drink beer or whatever.
That's great. That's great. Also, I think that there's something to the fact that the turtle success is an accident, and I feel like that goes towards the accessibility that you're talking about because these guys were made as a joke in a couple of guys, room.
Yeah, they just made like one comic, and that was like, that like Turtles number one is like a complete story.
Yes.
It's like, yeah, that's the end. And I think, yeah, they had no idea it was going to be huge.
And then when did you start submitting? Like, when did you realize you could draw? Like, is that also when you started realizing you could draw pretty well?
Yeah, like I would draw like little like cartoon characters like that were like obviously like rip-offs of like Hobbs and stuff, little like animal characters. And I draw dinosaurs and stuff like that. And I think when I really got serious about it was like my last year in college, actually,
Hmm.
where like I went to school for comics, but I don't know, like I didn't. I mean, I guess I didn't really take anything seriously back then, but like
As we
there,
are wont to do.
right, yeah, it was just college, it's just this fantasy world or whatever. But like I remember in my senior year of college where I just had this kind of moment where I was just like this is it. Like I'm gonna graduate at the end of this, and I'm gonna be in the real world, and like I don't know how to do anything. And that it's just like, I'm gonna take this comics thing seriously finally. And like, I'm
Hmm.
really gonna do this. And I like put together a portfolio. And back then there was no Twitter for like making connections and networking and stuff. So like, like I would go to the conventions with like, my portfolio in hand, and I would
Yeah.
like, do you want to look at my stuff, to editors, and like, that was, and I just pounded the pavement. And like, like obviously like DC and Marvel and stuff like wanted nothing to do with my stuff back then. But I talked to like indie publishers, and Oni Press was the first
Mm.
publisher to like give me a shot.
That's
You know,
great. That's great. Do you remember the editor who gave you the
yeah,
shot?
Jamie Rich,
And
who
yeah, what
I
was that
still
like?
I still work with. I still work with Jamie like every so often, because he was working on Ninja Turtles for a bit. Um, and like we still kind of see each other around. So shout out to Jamie Rich.
The first few works that you did are all from Oni Press, Too Much Hopeless
Yep.
Savages, Spooked, and Wet Moon, which
Yeah,
is
Wet
all
was
your
a big.
own.
Yeah,
Yeah, would
that
you
was.
want to tell our readers what our viewers what Wet Moon is all about?
Wet Moon is kind of like, I usually describe it kind of like Twin Peaks meets Saved by the Bell, where it's like, but like with like goth kids. And a lot of it was like it's like kind of based on my time living in Savannah, Georgia, here in the States, and going to college, going to like art school there, and just like
Oh, you went to
just kind of,
SCAD.
yeah, I did go to SCAD. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. And a lot of it was like, there's something about, I don't know if you've ever been to Savannah or Georgia, or that area, but there's like, it's like kind of swampy and like kind of like spooky, I guess.
Hmm.
There's just like something about it that like really stuck with me, where I was like, this is like a weird city. There's like a lot of movies shot there, but like they never show you like what's on the other side of the camera or whatever, where it's just like this weird kind of like muggy, swampy, weird place. And that like really stuck with me. And like Wet Moon is like a lot about that kind of stuff. And just like slice of life stuff, characters just like living their lives and stuff, and kind of this weird Twin Peaksy spookiness like off on the side.
What did you learn from making an original graphic novel so soon after, this is only a couple of years after you started working?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I learned that like drawing is hard. um I mean, looking back on that stuff, like the thought of like drawing a like 150 to 200 page book, just it seems like unfathomable to me now, where I'm just like, god, like I had so much energy. And like like I starting drawing that book, I was just like, wow, like I don't know how to draw buildings, like I don't know how to draw cars. And it was kind of just this like trial by fire, I guess, where I was like, well, I guess I better learn how to do that. That seems important. And yeah, it was drawing like so much in Wet Moon Volume 1 for like the first time. And I think,
Yeah.
yeah, like I just learned like I have so much else to learn, and I have so far to go, where I feel like I'm like really capable. I still don't know if I'm there yet. It's been a while, but
I feel like all of you artists that I talk to kind of always say that you don't know, you're always on a process of improvement,
absolutely.
um, including Bill Sienkiewicz.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And I'm like, you're Bill Sienkiewicz.
I
What?
think I think all, not that I'm like up there with Sienkiewicz or whatever, but I think all like the best artists will have a similar
It's
response to that.
it is so great that I feel like none of you ever want to just coast. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah. Like I'm always, I mean, it would be nice to coast. I'm not gonna lie. Like that sounds nice. Where it's like, I don't have to really, I got it. I got the gist. Like I don't have to do any of that stuff, and then just like collect a paycheck or whatever. Like, that sounds kind of nice. But yeah, like whenever I'm like actively drawing, I'm like, this isn't good enough. Like it needs to have something else. Like I need to push or whatever.
I'm gonna go ask you about the fact that you actually did end up drawing some Ninja Turtles comics.
I
Yes,
did.
so how did
Yeah.
that feel?
At first it was really tough because all like the licensing stuff was like very different back then. And like, I was a real diva back then. And coming into Ninja Turtles, like I was just like, okay, like I've been waiting my whole life to do this. Like I was born to draw this and I have a vision for it and it's going to be exactly like this, like exactly like I envision. And it wasn't like at all, like I would draw, the turtles like how I had always drawn them. And then they'd be like, well, you can't do that because it's part of this broader series and like here's what they look like, kind of thing,
Hmm.
which makes sense to me now, but at the time I was just like enraged, and like I was like losing sleep over it and like fighting with Nickelodeon and stuff. And so at the time, like it was really just like emotionally taxing for me. And I was just like, I can't do this. Like, I'm never gonna work on Turtles like full time. Like it's too much for me. Like I'm too much of a fan,
I
kind
get
of,
it.
Yeah. And like I came back eventually, obviously,
Yeah.
and went on to do like a ton more Turtles work. But I think I'm much more mellow now, and I can like roll with the punches more. And now that like the Turtle series is like established, it's like it's like much less like rigid or whatever. And it's bigger than me, you know.
Is there a
And
difference between drawing the Ninja Turtles, which, as you're talking about, is corporately owned, right? It's a
right,
licensed property, so you
yeah,
have to adhere to the model sheets, which I totally get it. You draw a character in a certain way, like envision them a certain way all your life, and then all of a sudden their looks change and you can't do anything about it.
yeah.
So something like the Turtles, as opposed to your own original work, as opposed to something like Glory, which is also owned by someone else, but is a little more flexible. So like I get that the way that you draw the characters change, but is there also a difference in the way that you're laying out the pages, telling the story, pacing the story, the number of panels per page, etc.?
No, no, like that stuff is generally pretty fluid, I think, unless like an editor will be like, oh, like what if you did 6 panels on this page instead of 5 and had panel 6 be da 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 da. Like,
Hmm.
but they would never, like I've never had an editor or licensor like hand me anything like that and be like, the page needs to be laid out like this. I've never had that happen before.
Is there ever a case where it's like this Turtles page needs more splashes?
Actually, that is something editors seem to push for a lot is splash pages, um, which I actually don't like. I don't really like splash pages that much. I feel like I don't know. I feel like it's kind of like a waste.
If you do it too much, it means less.
Yeah, it means less, and there's something about just like using the whole page of a like it's like using page 16 of a larger comic to and using the full page that I just don't like. Like it's exactly the same as like drawing a cover, for example, but like mentally it's different. Where
Hmm.
I'm just like, I hate this. Like I want it, like I want it to be in little boxes or whatever. I don't know. Yeah, it's hard to explain, but I I don't like yeah, I don't like splash pages, and
No, I get it. Yeah.
even less, I like double page spreads. That's like bottom of the barrel for me. Um, and I have I've done double page spreads. I have a couple in the Mothra series I'm currently working on.
Yeah.
I have one. I wrote a double page spread in Supergirl number 3, where I'm just like, fine, fine, I'll do a spread. You happy
You
now?
wait, you wrote that in for yourself.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So I'm just like, it's very reluctant. I'm just like, all right, fine, I'll
Okay.
do it. Yeah.
No, I get it because I grew up in the 90s. So a lot of comics were about splashes and double page spreads, right?
Yeah. I have no
Uh-uh.
problem reading them in other
Yeah,
comics, but there's something about doing them myself. Like it never occurs to me to do that really.
I get it.
Like naturally if I'm just like writing it,
Would you
like it never
would
occurs
you
to me
call
to.
yourself a maximalist because you would like to fit in as much story as possible? Or
It's it's tough because I feel like when I write my own stuff, my natural instinct is to be like really decompressed.
Mhm.
Like if you look at the my wet moon stuff, it's like it's like very slow. There's like a lot of panels where quote unquote like nothing happens and stuff like that. So I don't know if I'm a maximalist. Um,
It sounds like writer Sophie and artist Sophie are fight a lot.
yes, absolutely.
Really? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Because like when I'm writing, okay, here's an example. So I was working on a Godzilla pitch like a couple of years ago, and I was like, okay, like, how can I do a Godzilla pitch that keeps me from having to draw all the things that I don't want to draw, which is like buildings, vehicles, crowds of people, which are all kind of things that like you want in a Godzilla comic, right? And I was just like, I don't want to draw that stuff. So what if what if Godzilla is just in like a nuclear post-apocalyptic wasteland where there are no buildings, there are no people? What about that? And so like I built this pitch like around that. Like that's like artist Sophie, where it's just like I don't want to draw any of that stuff. Like I just want to draw like Godzilla in the background is just like a line in the background or whatever. But when that Godzilla pitch, it like changed. It changed over the years. Like the editors changed and stuff. And eventually, I turned it into a Mothra pitch.
Hmm.
And once I was no longer drawing that, and my good friend and collaborator Matt Frank was drawing it, I was just like, oh, I'll put a city scene in now. Like that. Like I'm just like, well, I don't have to worry about it. Like I'll just put it in the script and let the artist worry about it. That's the difference.
It's okay if somebody else draws.
Exactly. Like I try to go easy on artists sometimes, like just like, oh, like I'm not gonna make you draw like an amusement park with like a Ferris wheel, which is like a nightmare to draw. Like I'm never gonna do that to an artist. But I'm gonna be much freer giving them stuff to draw that I myself would never want to draw.
Okay. So before we get into Supergirl, I want to talk about another licensed comic that you've done, which is
Sure.
Gem and the Holograms.
Yeah.
Uh, Gem was huge in the 80s, huge. And I think at the time that you drew this comic, the had the movie just come out?
We actually like beat the movie by like a couple of months, I think.
Okay.
With
Yeah.
like number 1, yeah.
Interestingly, you were talking about having a very, very set view for the Ninja Turtles when you started drawing the Ninja Turtles. But you drew Gem and the Holograms completely differently from the way they looked in the 80s. Why is that? Was that you? Was that licensing, or how'd
That
that work out?
was no, that was like totally me. That's
Okay.
kind of like um that's like kind of artist Sophie, because I knew that, I love the old designs. I love that old cartoon. It's like, it's iconic. And but at the same time, it's like I'm just like, yeah, this is it's not me, really.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm gonna get, they would change outfits and stuff in the show, but like, mostly their hair would stay the same, and I knew that I was gonna get bored drawing the same hairstyles and stuff in every issue. So I was just like, yeah, like their hair is gonna be changing all the time. Their outfits are gonna be changing all the time because I'm gonna get bored. And in in the old show, like they all kind of had kind of the same body type, like the same basic face,
Yes.
and that's another thing where like I'm gonna get bored.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, like they should all look different, and just like when I'm the artist, like if I'm drawing the same thing over and over again, like I just want to die. And it need like they it needs to there needs to be some kind of shift from issue to issue, scene to scene, or it's going to lose me and I'm going to run out of steam. So like that was a lot of like the choice there, where it's just like, yeah, like they're going to be like very fluid, like they're going to look like themselves from issue to issue, but it's, everything beyond that is going to be very fluid.
And one more question about Gem and the Holograms. Is Gem's boyfriend cheating on her with Jerica, or the other way around? It's a thorny ethical question.
I would say I would say Rio is having like an emotional affair. Like in the old cartoon and in the comic, like he never like explicitly like goes to like make out with Jem or whatever. Like he never does that. But there's something there, like he's intrigued or whatever. And I think like he probably thinks about Jem, yeah, emotional affair.
You have been announced as the new creator, writer, and artist for Supergirl, which is coming out in May as part of this whole super initiative for
Yeah, summer of
this
Superman.
the summer of Superman. Can you talk about what went into your pitch for Supergirl and how you managed to land this project as both writer and artist?
Well, they approached me to work on it, and I had just lost a big job at Marvel, like late last year, and like something I had been working on for months, and they're just like, nah, pull the plug, and I was just like, shit, I don't have any money. Like, what am I gonna do? Like I just lost this big job, and then
The ultimate
DC,
incentive.
yes, very good. Yeah, like even if I had not wanted, like even if I was just like, oh, I hate Supergirl, like I probably would have had to say yes to that job. And but luckily, luckily I love Supergirl, so it's fine. But yeah, like they kind of just like Superman, they kind of swooped in like out of the blue to like rescue me, basically. It's just like very very good timing, very serendipitous, and it's just like, yes, yes, I will do it, like absolutely. And I started doing like all this research and stuff, and um, I had read, like when I was a kid, my dad had this big, I still have it around here somewhere, but this big like red hardcover Superman book of like comics from like 38 up to like 71, I think it's like this, this old book, like, printed in 71 with comics like up to that point. And so I was like familiar with some of like the Silver Age stuff
Yeah.
and like how like bonkers it is, and so that was kind of like my springboard into like doing research and stuff. And like, I was a big fan of like the CW Supergirl show, and like those were my kind of two big touchstones. And I read like Woman of Tomorrow, and I read some of the Rebirth stuff.
Mhm.
But the stuff that like really resonated with me was like specifically the solo Supergirl series in 1972.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was like, it didn't last like super long, I don't think. I can't remember how many issues it made it to, but like, she's like, she goes to college, and it's still kind of, it's like Bronze Age, but it's still kind of Silver Agey a little bit. And like, that's the one where I was just like, that's what I want to do. Like, it should be, we got to bring back like thought bubbles, like thought balloons. And there's something like really like kind of freewheeling and earnest about those old comics that I
Yes.
like. You don't like so, like sometimes they move so fast, and it's like every panel is kind of like and then this happened, and then the character produces this device that she had already prepared, and you're like, wait, what? And it's like, like every panel kind of has that where you're just like, what? Wait, what? Like that could be like a whole comic by itself, but it's just one panel, and it just keeps moving. You can't get, you got to just let yourself be swept up in it. And there was something about that I really liked, and like just like the earnestness of it, and just how it wasn't like concerned so much with like the lore of it.
No. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of, I was just like, okay, she should go back to Midvale, because like that's where all these like insane stories happen in those early Supergirl comics. And it should be this kind of like, this sort of like 60s thing. And I think that would be really fun. And that was basically like the original pitch. Like, she goes back to Midvale, and hijinks ensue.
That's great. I think that that the Silver Age going into the Bronze Age is a very specific sweet spot.
I think so. Yeah, I agree.
Where it's starting to look like it's a little more serious, but it's still kind of not.
Yeah, yeah, like the characters, they're more stylish too, which is like a big selling point for me. Like, like Supergirl's eyebrows like start to be like drawn like really well. And she did, yeah, they just look, they almost look like romance comics characters, which I really like. And she like changes costumes sometimes and has different outfits, which I love. And
Which is why wouldn't she?
yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Like if I was a superhero, like why would I want to wear the same thing every time? Like as long as you have like the S, you're good.
Yeah. Some of my first comics ever were that time period when Spider-Man was changing between red and blue and the black costume.
Oh, yeah,
Not,
yeah.
when it wasn't a symbiote. And I just never thought twice about it. I'm like, why wouldn't he change costumes?
Yeah. Like what if one's in the wash or whatever? Like
Exactly.
yeah. It's just and it's just fun. And that it kind of goes back to the gem thing where I'm just like, like I need to draw like different outfits and stuff.
So Supergirl is an ongoing series
Yes.
that takes place in Midvale. How will this tie into all of the other Superman books, or will it not?
I think there's like some nods to the other stuff. But like right now think I don't think we're doing like any like really explicit stuff like, like, oh, like you have to read this other thing. to get what's going on. Like so far, there's none of that kind of
Thank
stuff.
God.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's annoying. Yeah.
And so she's returning to Midvale. Who are we expecting her to run into in Midvale? Sporting cast first.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say, but I'm bringing back like some older characters from like the Bronze Age stuff. Uh, Clarissa Gilt Edge. I don't know if you remember her.
Not really, but that's
She's
great.
in, like, I don't know. She's in like 2 issues or something, but like she's in it. Kara's parents are in it. Crypto, Streaky.
Oh, Crypto is in it.
Crypto's in it.
Okay.
Streaky's in it. Lena Luther is in it.
Oh.
Yeah, so she's like, she's like a big character in it. Lesla Lar is in it, who I love.
Mm-hmm.
She's the main villain for the first couple issues. Satan Girl is in it.
Love it.
Yes. Titano the Super Ape is in it.
Yes.
I love him. Terry Blake, I think is her name. She was Kara's like college roommate back in the 70s. So she's in it.
I think interestingly, you mentioned Lena Luther, and anybody who watched the CW show will have a preconception of what their relationship is like because, which is they're friends. But anyone who didn't watch it is going to think they're enemies. So how are you going to play that?
There's like, so in the comics, she's Lex Luthor's daughter, his sister, like in the show. But there's still this like, I think maybe one of the only nods I have to like the larger series is that when this comes out, Superman and Lex are gonna be like enemies again, because there was a period of time where they were friends, and Lex Luthor was like, he had like lost his memories of being evil or something like that. And so Lena, like, she mentions like, oh, my dad and your cousin are like at odds again, like that kind of thing. So there's definitely gonna be like a little bit of tension between Kara and Lena. It's like, these two like major, family lines or whatever that are like historically, enemies are, kind of coming together. So, like who knows what's gonna happen. I mean, I do, but
Okay. I mentioned anybody who watched a CW show and anybody who didn't watch a CW show. But anyone who followed the discourse on Supergirl on the internet will also have another preconception of Supergirl and Lena Luther's relationship.
Yeah, I don't think that's not going to happen.
Okay, I had to ask that. And what would you say is the central theme of Supergirl, the series that you're working on?
Theme. I think maybe seeing something that wasn't there before, and something that you didn't see because of like kind of like a preconceived notion about something or somebody.
Okay. I feel like that's enough of a teaser for the rest of the series.
Yeah, I think so.
What have you learned as a creator, as both a writer and an artist, or perhaps as a writer artist who's at odds with each other, while working on Supergirl that you haven't yet in prior projects?
It's definitely new because like I did Glory and Turtles, but which are like kind of like superhero adjacent, but I feel like Supergirl is like the first, just straight up superhero thing. And at first, when I was like drawing the first couple of pages for issue 1, I was just like, I can't do this. I've bitten off more than I can chew. Like, what am I doing? I don't know how to draw like superhero. Like I have to draw her flying. I don't know how to do that. Just um, kind of like basic stuff where I just had this kind of like crisis moment or whatever. And but continue. I had to continue, and I think going on, as I went along, I learned just like, oh, I can do this. Like I know what I'm doing, and like that may seem kind of small, like, oh, I learned that I can draw a book that I was hired to draw, but I think for me, like, that's kind of big. Like, like maybe I am cut out for this. Maybe I
Picked you
do.
for a reason.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Like maybe they didn't make a mistake, that kind of thing. Um, and just like, I did do actually, they approached me because of the short that I did in Superman Red and Blue like a few years back.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
excellent anthology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad that was great. It was great, like getting to work on that. But the old Supergirl series, it's like, it's not like 6 pages or whatever. It's like a much bigger thing, much more daunting. But yeah, I'm learning that, I'm I am cut out for this. Like maybe I can do this.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the 1972 series as your starting off point for the story, but which artists would you say are you taking your cues from? Or like if you don't know how to draw her flying, who are you looking at so that you can learn that stuff?
I've actually been looking at photography of people underwater. That's like my starting point. I feel like when I look at other artists, like obviously I'm reading, all sorts of Supergirl comics, like like the old like Jim Mooney stuff, or like Bilquis Evely. She's amazing, obviously. But when it like comes down to it, when I'm like sitting down to draw, I almost always look at like photos of stuff,
Yeah.
and I'm just like, like how's she going to be posed? Like I know how to draw kind of like an iconic flying pose, for example, but I'm just like yeah, like I can't draw that like every time. Like she's going to have to be in different positions when she's flying in different directions, or if she's like turning in midair and stuff like that. And I feel like there's a lot of photography of people doing like underwater photo shoots where they're kind of like suspended, in like the deep end of a pool or something, and like that's kind of like the main touchstone that I've been using for that.
Thank God for Google Images.
Yes, thank God for and Pinterest. There's like a lot of AI slop on those. Like you gotta have to kind of comb through it, but yeah, it's all still there.
Have you heard of the Google search term to remove AI images?
No, what's that?
I think it's like you basically put in a date range that says before 2021.
Oh, that's clever.
Because 2021 is when that started taking off.
Oh my God, I never thought of that. That's clever. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna try that for sure.
Yeah, if it's not time sensitive, you may as well, right?
Right. Yeah.
But,
awesome.
I did notice, and I guess I really do want to ask this. Did you set this in Midvale partly so you didn't have to draw skyscrapers?
Yes and no. Like it's actually like drawing like suburban homes is more difficult than drawing like skyscraper buildings.
Why is that?
Because when you're drawing skyscrapers, you can kind of get away with just drawing like, all right, here's like like a giant rectangle or whatever, and then you just like draw like some hatching crisscrosses, and like, there you go, they're your windows. And a lot of like really modern skyscrapers, like they're just like glass or whatever with like a grid on them, which is like super easy to draw. But with suburban homes, like there's like architecture, and like windows with like shutters on them, and there's like there's like a very specific kind of look, which is more intensive for me. So I may have shot myself in the foot a little bit.
It's okay. It's okay. My last question is this. Can you finish the sentence or fill in the blank? If you like blank, you should be reading Supergirl.
Oh my gosh. If you like
you can't say another Supergirl thing. That's cheating.
Like, if you like comics,
I'll take it.
All right, good. I'm sure I'll come up with like a real answer like after I hung up with you. I'll be like, that's what I should have said. So.
Well, I do think that in this specific case, the Summer of Superman, all of that stuff, the Supergirl, the way you describe the whimsy of your Supergirl series, I'm gonna go ahead and say it. I think we need more comics like this in the year 2025.
Yes, I agree. Like, it doesn't, there's going to be like, like real emotion and stuff, like real characters and stuff there. But yeah, like definitely, yeah, more like uplifting stuff, I think.
Thank you so much, Sophie. This was a great interview. I look forward to reading Supergirl. And good luck drawing all of those suburban homes.
Oh my God. What have I done?